Howdy, howdy, people. Today is a great day, an awesome day, because I am releasing my new book, Writer, Seeker, Killer. And I wanted to tell you all a little more about it. What it's all about, how it came to be, and what I hope to accomplish by releasing it. The story deals with a young girl named Hananya Ven who is both suicidal and obsessed with the question of what happens to us after we die. A few years back, I found myself pretty curious about that same kind of question. I looked into several avenues that were said to be able to offer an out-of-body experience, but time and time again I was disappointed. I came to the conclusion that I was nothing more than a brain and a body. There was no way I could access my soul or know if I possibly had one, so the physical existence that I have is all that I can confirm. But the idea for this story came about a year after I moved to New Orleans. It's a fun place to be sure, but also a rather beleaguered and defeated city. Most of the buildings here are in a state of disrepair or abandoned, and I'm sure you have a pretty good idea about the crime and poverty down here. Coming here as an outsider, I was an unwitting victim of both. I used to live in some bad neighborhoods because the rent was cheap and that was all I could afford at the time. For a while, things were pretty bad for me, but I always had the option of moving back to Massachusetts where I was from. Yet doing that felt like I would be quitting somehow. I needed to go it alone and overcome several different challenges that were going on in my life at the time. And because of that stubbornness, I was mugged. Not only that, I also developed relationships with some really unhealthy people. Because at the end of the day, I figured it was better than being alone. One of those people was murdered in cold blood during a robbery. He was mixed up in drugs, had been back and forth to prison, yet he had never hurt anyone. None of the crimes were violent offenses. My friend was a victim of the war on drugs. Yes, he was a drug dealer. No, he did not deserve to be murdered simply on that basis. I came to see how the war on drugs was a failure. I mean, it was blatantly obvious in New Orleans. Over time, I was able to step away from those negative elements and week by week do more than just survive with my paychecks. But just because I was beyond the range of those negative elements didn't mean that other people weren't. I had encountered some dangerous forces that were bred in New Orleans, but others don't have an option to escape things like that, and it ends up costing them their autonomy and their lives. So I wanted to try to write a story that would boil all those concepts together. It came in the form of a psychological thriller. For a lot of people living in poverty, survival is the #1 priority. They can't worry about anything else. A couple works that inspired Writer, Seeker, Killer at the time of me writing it were Mulholland Drive, a movie that shows all the glitz of Hollywood, but just under the surface you see all the corruption and degradation that goes on in making movies. Requiem for a Dream, which is an amazing movie, one of my favorites actually, that shows the ill effects of drug abuse. And also Jacob's Ladder and A Scanner Darkly, both of which illustrate the way in which the government leverages drugs to use for their own ends, all the while pretending like they're this thing to be condemned. My own opinion on the war on drugs is it wasn't started over some moral or public safety concern. No, I think it was a way of controlling some population factions at the time that the administration perceived as the most severe threat, notably the black underclass and the hippie counterculture. One thing that I want readers to take away from this book is we need to lean on available empirical evidence and facts when we're outlawing substances. Right now, LSD is a Schedule I drug. That means that according to the US government, LSD has no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. And while it is true that we do not understand the long-term effects of LSD on the brain because of a draconian and ignorant just say no policy, it is not true that LSD is addictive, and it is false that it has no medical use. As a matter of fact, studies show, which I've listed in the description below, that LSD and psychedelics like LSD have legitimate therapeutic benefits, and also may help to cure alcohol addiction, soothe terminally ill patients, and recondition criminals to be better reintegrated into society. Thus, when used properly, these so-called dangers to society, which in outlawing them have given birth to genuinely violent and dangerous crimes and activities, could actually help a lot of suffering people out. I think the simplest example I could put it is what happened to my friend, because he kept going back to prison, and then when he would get out, because he was a convict for nonviolent drug offenses, he wasn't able to get the greatest jobs. And so it kind of forced him into positions where he had to sell drugs, and it kept happening until he got in with worse and worse people. And he stayed addicted to drugs. Because after the criminal justice system was done punishing him, they had no interest in helping him improve or stop being a criminal. It's probably in their best interest to allow him to continue doing what he was doing. Yeah, going on a tirade today. I'm not sure if Writer, Seeker, Killer will ultimately turn the tide and put a stop to the war on drugs, but I do think it will make people think. There's no reason why we can't at least question what would happen if we favored rehabilitation over criminalization for drug addicts and drug dealers. It's a pretty intense read in itself, and I hope if you're interested, you'll check it out. The link to buy the book is below. This is Ryan Starblook, and I implore you to have a good day.